In a quiet town, not very big and not very small, there lived a man named Daniel. He was 30 years old, but he often felt much older. Every day he walked the same street to the same small shop where he worked. The shop sold bread, milk, and simple things for daily life. Daniel's job was to put the food on the shelves, clean the floor, and help customers when they needed something. It was honest work, but it did not make his heart feel alive. He earned just enough money to pay his rent and buy food, but never enough to save for the future. His clothes were simple, his days were the same, and his evenings were very quiet. When he came home from work, he usually sat alone in his small room. He sometimes watched television, sometimes read an old book, but often he just stared at the ceiling and wondered what the meaning of his life was. He thought about the years passing, one after another, and he asked himself if this was everything. Was life only about working, eating, and sleeping? Inside, he felt a strong emptiness, like a hole that nothing could fill. He dreamed of something bigger, something more important, but he did not know what it was or how to find it. Daniel often told himself, maybe one day something will change. Maybe one day a chance will come. But day after day, nothing changed. People in town knew him as a quiet man, kind but invisible. He was not bad, not lazy, not unkind. He was simply ordinary, and being ordinary felt like being lost. He began to believe that maybe he was not meant for more, that maybe life would always stay the same. And yet, deep inside his heart, there was still a very small light. That light was hope. It was weak, but it was not gone. It told him in a quiet voice, perhaps one decision, one moment, could change everything. He did not know when or how, but he carried that thought with him like a secret flame in the dark. Daniel's mornings always began in the same way. His alarm clock rang at 6 o'clock, the same sharp sound every day. He sat up slowly, rubbed his eyes, and looked around his small room. The wallpaper was old, the paint was fading, and the furniture was second-hand. There was a bed, a chair, and a table. On the table, there was usually a half-finished cup of tea from the night before. Daniel washed his face in cold water, put on the same work clothes, and walked to the shop. The walk took 15 minutes, and along the way, he saw the same people every day, the old woman watering flowers, the children running to school, the bus driver starting his route. Everyone seemed busy, everyone seemed to know where they were going. Daniel smiled politely when people greeted him, but inside he felt like he was walking in circles. At the shop, his boss gave him simple tasks. Clean the shelves, Daniel. Carry these boxes. Help the customers. He did everything without complaint, but he felt no pride, no excitement. Sometimes he looked at the people buying bread and milk, and he wondered if their lives were also like his, ordinary, quiet, without meaning. But when he looked into their eyes, he saw something different. He saw parents holding children, workers rushing to their jobs, students laughing with friends. They all seemed to have a purpose, even if it was small. Daniel felt like he was standing outside of life, watching others live. At lunch break, he usually sat in the back of the shop with a sandwich. He ate quickly, then returned to work. Time moved slowly, and by evening, he felt tired, though not from hard work but from the weight of sameness. When the shop closed, Daniel walked home again, passing the same streets, the same lights, the same shadows. He unlocked his door, stepped inside his small room, and sat down. Another day was finished, and tomorrow would look exactly the same. He thought to himself, is this all? Is this everything that life has for me? Sometimes. He tried to imagine a different life, maybe studying, maybe traveling, maybe doing something creative. But the images in his mind faded quickly because he did not believe they could be real. The idea of change felt too big, too far, too impossible. And so, every night, Daniel lay in bed with the same heavy feeling in his chest, waiting for sleep to take him, waiting for another day to begin again. On Sundays, when the shop was closed, Daniel had more time, but free time did not always mean freedom. He often woke up later, made tea, and looked out of his small window. From there he could see the town square, where families walked together, children played, and street musicians played guitars or violins. The air smelled of fresh bread from the bakery and roasted coffee from the cafe. People laughed, talked, and lived with energy. Daniel watched them quietly, like a person looking through a window at a world where he did not belong. Sometimes he thought about joining them, maybe sitting in the cafe or buying bread from the bakery. But when he imagined himself there, he felt shy. He felt he had nothing to say, nothing interesting to share. He was afraid people would see him as boring, as just a shop worker with no story. So, instead of joining, he stayed at home. He read old newspapers, cleaned his small room, or walked slowly around the town. On these walks, he noticed things: the sound of birds, the cracks in the pavement, the way the sunlight touched the old buildings. The town was beautiful in small ways, but to Daniel it was also a prison. Each corner reminded him of how little his life had changed. He had been living in the same place for years, working the same job, walking the same streets. Sometimes, when he passed by the train station, he stopped and watched trains leaving. He imagined where they were going, maybe to a big city, maybe to the sea, maybe to mountains far away. He dreamed of sitting on one of those trains, carrying only a small bag, starting a new life. But the dream always stayed a dream. He told himself he had no money, no skills, no courage. He repeated the same excuses until he almost believed them. On those quiet Sundays, Daniel felt the emptiness strongest. He asked himself, am I alive, or am I only existing? His heart wanted more, but his mind said, it is too late, too hard, too dangerous. And so, the days and weeks passed, and Daniel kept waiting. Waiting for a chance. Waiting for a sign. Waiting for something, or maybe someone, that could show him another way. Daniel's biggest struggle was not only his simple job or his small room. His real struggle was inside his own mind. Every morning he woke up with a heavy thought: nothing will ever change. This thought followed him like a shadow. When he carried boxes in the shop, the shadow was there. When he walked home at night, the shadow walked beside him. It whispered to him that he was too ordinary, too weak, too late to do anything different. Money was also a problem. His salary was just enough to survive. After paying rent, food, and small bills, there was almost nothing left. He could not travel, he could not buy new clothes, and he could not join activities that cost money. Sometimes his friends from school invited him to go out, maybe to eat dinner together or see a movie. Daniel always refused politely, saying, I am busy, or I am tired, but the real reason was that he could not afford it. Slowly, the invitations stopped coming, and Daniel became more and more alone. His evenings were silent, his weekends were empty, and his heart grew heavier with each passing month. He often felt invisible, like the world was moving forward while he stayed in the same place. He wanted to scream sometimes, to cry out loud, but no one was there to hear him. Instead, he kept everything inside. At night, when the town was quiet, he sometimes lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. His thoughts turned in circles: what if I had studied harder? What if I had taken a chance when I was younger? What if I had tried something different? The what if questions were endless, and they brought him pain. Regret was like a chain, keeping him tied to the past. And fear was another chain, keeping him from moving toward the future. Together, they locked him in place. Yet even in this prison of regret and fear, a small voice still whispered, there must be more. Daniel felt it late at night, in the quiet moments, when the world outside seemed to sleep. That voice was weak, but it did not disappear. It gave him a strange feeling: maybe change was still possible, even for someone like him. Daniel's struggles also showed in the way he looked at himself. When he passed a mirror, he sometimes stopped and studied his own face. He saw tired eyes, lines beginning to grow around them, and a mouth that rarely smiled. His hair was a little messy, his clothes were old but clean, and nothing about him seemed special. He thought, who would notice me? Who would care if I was here or not? This thought hurt him more than any empty pocket or lonely evening. He longed to be seen, to be important to someone, but he did not know how to change. At work, customers came and went, and most never even learned his name. To them, he was only the man at the shop. His boss was polite but distant, and no one asked about his dreams or feelings. Days blended together, and Daniel began to feel like a machine: wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Sometimes, on the way home, he stopped at the small park in the center of town. He sat on a bench and watched people. Daniel often compared himself with others, and this made his struggles heavier. On the way to work, he passed by a university. He saw students carrying laptops and books, walking quickly to their classes, talking with excitement about projects or dreams. Their faces were full of energy, their steps were full of purpose. Daniel felt like an outsider, someone who had missed the train of life. He thought, they are moving forward, and I am standing still. The same feeling came when he looked at families. His old school friends now had children, homes, and jobs that seemed important. They shared pictures of holidays, birthdays, and celebrations. Daniel had nothing like that to share. His life was too quiet, too empty. At night, when he scrolled through his phone, he saw those happy pictures and stories. Instead of joy, he felt pain. He thought, why not me? Why am I always left behind? The question repeated in his head like a drumbeat, but no answer came. Sometimes he became angry with himself. He blamed his past choices, his lack of courage, his fear of risk. But other times, he felt hopeless, as if fate had written his story already, and he was powerless to change it. The hardest part was the silence of his room. When he closed the door after work, no voice welcomed him, no one asked about his day. The walls felt close, the air felt heavy, and the silence pressed on his chest. He sometimes talked to himself just to break that silence. One day, he whispered, one day something will happen. But the days turned into months, and nothing happened. He wondered if waiting was a mistake, if life was not about waiting at all but about acting. Yet action frightened him. He feared making the wrong step, feared failing, feared losing the little he had. So he continued in the same circle: work, eat, sleep, dream, regret, repeat. Still, deep in his heart, a question refused to die: what if one choice could open a door? He did not yet know, but that question was already shaping his future. Winter came, and the town grew cold. Snow covered the streets, and Daniel's walks to the shop became slower and harder. His shoes were thin, and the icy wind cut through his old coat. Still, he continued, because there was no other choice. At night, the darkness arrived early, and his small room felt even lonelier than before. He tried reading to escape the heavy feelings, but the words on the page often blurred as his thoughts wandered. He thought about years passing quickly. He thought about how little had changed. Sometimes he imagined himself old, still working in the same shop, still living in the same room, still waiting for something that never came. The picture frightened him deeply. Is this my whole life? He asked himself. That question stayed with him every day. Even at work, when customers smiled, when children laughed, when people greeted him kindly, Daniel still felt separate, like he was behind a glass wall. He could see life, but he could not touch it. One evening, after a long day, he stopped at the park. The trees were bare, the benches were covered with frost, and the fountain was frozen. Daniel sat down anyway. He watched his own breath rise like smoke in the air. The silence of the park pressed on him, and for the first time, tears rolled down his face. He did not cry loudly, but the quiet tears told him something important: he could not continue forever like this. He did not know how to change, but he felt he must. His heart whispered, there must be more. There must be another road. He wiped his face quickly, stood up, and walked home. That night, before sleeping, he looked at himself in the mirror. His reflection looked tired but honest. He said softly, "Daniel, you cannot live this way forever. Something must change." It was the first time he spoke the words clearly. He did not yet know when or how, but speaking them aloud made them real. And in that moment, the first tiny crack appeared in the wall that trapped him. Change was not here yet, but it was coming closer. Monday came quickly, faster than Daniel expected. All day at the shop, his stomach felt tight, and his hands trembled when he touched the shelves. He could hardly listen to customers. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, yet every sound of it reminded him that 6 o'clock was coming. 6 o'clock meant the office, the decision, the risk. He told himself again and again, maybe I should not go. Maybe I am not ready. He thought of excuses: he was tired, the weather was cold, the job would be too hard. Excuses piled up in his head like heavy stones. But then he also thought about the mirror, about the park, about the tears he had cried when life felt too empty. He remembered whispering to himself, something must change. If he ignored the card, if he stayed at home, he would be breaking his own promise. That thought hurt more than fear. At 5:30, the shop closed, and Daniel stood at the door with his coat on. His heart beat so loudly that he thought others could hear it. The office was not far away, only 15 minutes by foot, yet the walk felt like a journey to another world. The streets were dark, the lamps glowing softly, and the air smelled of snow. Each step felt heavy with doubt, but also light with hope. When he reached the building, he stopped in front of the door. The company's name was written on a bright sign. People walked in and out, carrying papers, wearing uniforms. Daniel stood still, frozen between two choices, to enter or to turn away. He whispered, "Daniel, this is the moment. If you step inside, your life could change. If you walk away, nothing will ever change." His hands shook as he reached for the door handle. He closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and then, slowly but firmly, pushed the door open. Warm air touched his face, and voices filled the hallway. It was the sound of a new world. For the first time in many years, Daniel had stepped out of the circle of sameness. He did not yet know what would happen next, but he knew this: he had chosen courage over fear. Inside the office, Daniel felt small and unsure. The room was bright, with white walls and busy people moving quickly. A young woman at the desk looked up and asked, "Can I help you?" Daniel's voice shook as he explained that he had received a card from a man in the shop. The woman nodded and handed him a simple form. "Fill this out," she said kindly. His hands trembled as he wrote his name, address, and age. When he gave the form back, she smiled. "Wait here. Someone will speak with you soon." Daniel sat on a chair, his heart racing. He looked around. Other men and women were also waiting. Some looked confident, others nervous like him. After a few minutes, a tall man entered the room. It was the same man who had given Daniel the card. He smiled warmly. "I see you decided to come. Good." His words gave Daniel a little courage. They went into a small office. The man explained the work: delivering packages, carrying boxes, helping customers. "It is not easy," he said, "but if you work hard, you can grow here." Daniel listened carefully, nodding. When the man asked, "Are you willing to try?" Daniel took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I want to try." The word yes felt heavy and strong, like a stone falling into water. In that moment, the first real step was taken. The first days at the delivery company were very difficult. Daniel's body was not used to long hours of lifting and moving heavy boxes. His back ached, his arms hurt, and his legs felt weak. He often returned home late at night, too tired even to eat properly. Yet, every time he thought about giving up, he remembered the empty evenings in his old room, the feeling of being trapped in sameness. Compared to that, the pain felt almost beautiful. It was the pain of progress, not of emptiness. At work, some of the younger men laughed at his slow speed. "Come on, old man," they joked. At first, Daniel felt embarrassed and wanted to hide. But then he remembered why he came: to change, to grow, to try. Slowly, he pushed himself harder. Each night he returned a little stronger, each morning he stood a little taller. He discovered something surprising: his fear of failure was bigger than failure itself. Even when he made mistakes, no one truly cared as much as he feared. His bosses saw his effort, and that effort mattered more than perfection. Paragraph 13. Money was still not much, but it was more than before. For the first time, Daniel had a little extra at the end of the month. He saved it carefully in a small envelope hidden in his drawer. This envelope was more than paper and coins, it was hope. It meant that change was possible. He no longer felt completely powerless. His evenings were no longer silent either. In the company, he met other workers, shared jokes, listened to their stories. Some were younger, dreaming of studies or travel. Some were older, supporting families. Their lives were not easy, but they carried themselves with pride. Working beside them, Daniel felt part of something. When he walked home at night, tired but not empty, he looked up at the stars. "I am not the same man I was," he whispered. He was beginning to understand the secret: courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward in spite of it. As weeks turned into months, Daniel's body grew stronger and his confidence grew too. Tasks that once seemed impossible became normal. He could carry heavy boxes without shaking, he could organize deliveries quickly, and sometimes he even helped others when they struggled. The man who had first given him the card noticed. One evening, he called Daniel into his office. "I have been watching you," he said. "You work hard, and you do not give up. That is rare." Daniel's face grew warm. No one had ever spoken to him that way before. The man continued, "I want to give you more responsibility. Can you train some of the new workers?" Daniel's heart jumped. Him? Train others? The thought felt unbelievable. But he nodded slowly. "Yes, I can try." From that day, Daniel was no longer just a worker. He was a teacher, a guide. He realized something powerful: growth does not happen all at once. It begins with one choice, one step, one small act of courage. Still, the road was not smooth. Some nights were harder than others. There were times when he made mistakes, sending a package to the wrong address, forgetting an important instruction, or arriving late because of bad weather. Each mistake felt heavy, and the old voice of doubt returned: "See? You cannot do this. You should give up." But now Daniel had new strength. He reminded himself, mistakes are not the end. They are steps to learning. Instead of hiding, he asked questions, listened to advice, and tried again. Slowly, the voice of doubt grew weaker. The voice of courage grew stronger. He was no longer the man who cried quietly in the park. He was becoming someone new, someone who believed that change was possible. And each small victory pushed him further from the shadow of his old life. One evening, after finishing his deliveries, Daniel stopped again at the park. But this time, the park felt different. It was no longer a place of sadness and loneliness. Instead, it was a place of reflection. He sat on the same bench where he had once cried, and he smiled. Around him, children still played, couples still walked, and families still laughed. But now, he no longer felt separate. He felt connected, as if he too was part of the great circle of life. He whispered, "I chose. I tried. And now I am alive." It was a quiet victory, invisible to others, but enormous to him. He realized that the biggest change was not in his job or his money. The biggest change was in his heart. He was no longer afraid of trying. That was freedom. As the months continued, people in town began to notice. Neighbors saw him walking with stronger steps. His boss at the shop, where he still worked during the day, noticed his energy and responsibility. Even customers at the shop said, "Daniel, you look different these days." He smiled politely, but inside he felt proud. The man who had once felt invisible was now being seen. This recognition gave him more courage. If people could see his change on the outside, then surely the change on the inside was real. For the first time in his life, he believed in his own value. With his saved money, Daniel began to make small changes in his daily life. He bought a new pair of shoes, strong enough for long walks in the snow. He replaced his old coat with a warm one. These were not expensive things, but to Daniel, they felt like symbols of progress. Each item reminded him, "I worked for this. I chose this. I am moving forward." He also allowed himself one small joy each week. On Sundays, instead of staying at home, he sat in a cafe near the town square. At first, he felt shy, afraid people would look at him. But soon he realized that no one was judging him. He drank coffee slowly, listened to the music, and watched life around him. The cafe became his window into a brighter world. And with each visit, he felt more comfortable being part of it. Something else also began to grow: respect from others. At the delivery company, new workers often looked up to Daniel. They came to him with questions, and he answered patiently. Some said, "Thank you, Daniel. You make the work easier." These simple words filled his heart with warmth. Respect was something he had never known before, not in the shop, not in his lonely room. Now he understood how powerful it was. Respect gave him dignity, and dignity gave him strength. He was no longer just living. He was building something that mattered not only to him, but also to others. One evening, while walking home after a long day, Daniel stopped at the train station. He had passed it many times before, always dreaming, always imagining what it would feel like to take a train to somewhere new. This time, he felt something different. He reached into his pocket and touched the small envelope of saved money. For the first time, the dream did not feel impossible. He could see himself buying a ticket, sitting by the window, watching the town fade behind him. The thought did not scare him anymore. Instead, it excited him. He smiled, realizing how far he had come. The man who once felt trapped, invisible, and hopeless was now standing at the edge of new possibilities. And it had all begun with a single decision, the decision to walk through a door and say yes. As months turned into a year, Daniel's life looked completely different. He woke up with energy, looking forward to the day. Work was still hard, but he no longer feared it. He had learned new skills, met people who inspired him, and even helped others succeed. His small apartment was now organized and tidy, reflecting his sense of pride. Daniel noticed a new feeling in his chest: happiness. It was not loud or dramatic, but gentle and steady. He realized that the joy came not only from work or money, but from knowing he had taken control of his life. Every day, he made small choices that led him further from fear and closer to freedom. When he walked through the town, he held his head higher. He no longer felt invisible. People smiled at him, greeted him warmly, and sometimes asked for advice. Daniel smiled back. He knew that respect and connection were not things that could be bought, they were earned through effort, courage, and persistence. Daniel also began helping others outside of work. He shared his story quietly with friends who felt stuck. He encouraged younger workers at the delivery company, teaching them the same lessons he had learned: courage, persistence, and the power of small decisions. People listened. Some laughed at first, but when they saw his results, how his life had changed, they began to believe. Daniel discovered a new purpose: helping others realize they could choose differently. Every small success of someone he guided felt like a victory in his own heart. He realized that life was not only about surviving or making money. It was about influence, connection, and the courage to act. The ordinary man who had once stared at the ceiling, dreaming silently, was now an inspiration. The shop where Daniel worked during the day remained the same, but he felt different in it. The aisles no longer felt like a prison. Each customer became a person to greet warmly, each task a chance to do something well. Daniel understood that attitude shaped life. Even the small things mattered. Cleaning a shelf, helping a customer, carrying a box, these acts were small, but when done with care, they built confidence and respect. He often reflected quietly on the early days, remembering fear, doubt, and hesitation. He smiled softly, thinking, I almost did not come to that office. I almost stayed in the same place forever. That thought gave him gratitude for the courage he had finally chosen. Daniel also noticed physical changes. His posture was stronger, his step was faster, and his eyes shone with confidence. People around him noticed and complimented him. But the biggest change was inside. He no longer let fear control him. When new challenges appeared, he met them with calmness and strategy. Mistakes no longer crushed him, they taught him lessons. For the first time, he felt in control of his own story. Life was no longer a circle of repetition. It was a path with direction, and each day, he chose to step forward. The invisible chains of doubt had fallen away, replaced with courage and clarity. One quiet evening, Daniel sat on the same bench in the park where he had once cried. The trees were green now, the sun setting slowly, casting golden light on the path. He remembered the old days, the emptiness, the fear, the tears. And he thought of the card, the office, and the single word he had said, yes. He realized that everything had changed because of that one decision. He smiled. Without it, he would still be trapped in routine, still staring at the ceiling, still hoping for a life that never came. That single choice had opened a door he never knew existed. He understood now that every choice carries power, even the smallest one. Daniel reflected on his journey with gratitude and humility. He understood that courage is not a moment of bravery, but a series of small decisions. Each day, he had chosen to move forward, even when tired or afraid. Each day, he had faced small challenges and kept going. Looking back, he saw clearly how fear had once controlled him, how waiting had trapped him, and how one small act, saying yes, had changed everything. He felt pride, not arrogance. Pride that came from knowing he had acted when he could have stayed quiet. Pride that came from learning to believe in himself. He also realized that life gives chances every day. The card he received had been unexpected, but opportunities come in many forms, small and simple, sometimes unnoticed. The difference between life stuck and life alive is action. Daniel thought about the people he knew who felt trapped or invisible. He wanted them to understand what he had learned, the power to change is always inside. One small choice, one small moment of courage, can create a ripple that changes everything. He felt ready to share this lesson gently with anyone who would listen. Daniel's story became a quiet inspiration in his town. People talked about the man who had transformed his life, not through magic or luck, but through courage and choice. They noticed his dedication, his energy, and his kindness. Some young people even came to him for advice. He always smiled and told them simply, the first step is to say yes. His life was no longer ordinary, it was meaningful. The work, the struggle, the effort, all had shaped him into someone who believed in the power of decision. He often repeated to himself, and to anyone willing to listen, that one decision can open a new road. Life is waiting, he said. Opportunities are around you. Fear is only a signal, not a wall. Choose, act, and move forward. He wanted people to understand that waiting for life to change without acting is a choice too, but it is a choice that keeps you stuck. Daniel had once been stuck, invisible, and hopeless. Now he was free, confident, and alive. And all it took was one single decision. Finally, Daniel smiled at the park, the town, the stars, and his own reflection. He understood the secret clearly: the power to change is in everyone's hands. Life is not about waiting, but about acting. Every day gives a new chance to decide differently, to step forward, to say yes. Daniel had said yes once, and it had changed everything. He whispered softly, "The power is in your hands. Your choice can open new doors. You can start today." With that thought, he walked home, heart light, head high, and a life full of possibilities stretching before him.